Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Roboute Guilliman, the legendary Primarch of the Ultramarines, was believed to be lost forever after sustaining a mortal wound at the hands of his traitorous brother Fulgrim. Entombed in stasis for 10,000 years, his fate became a myth, his name spoken with reverence and longing by those who hoped for his return. Yet, against all odds, Guilliman has returned to the Imperium at its darkest hour. How did he survive? What forces, both technological and supernatural, played a role in his resurrection? And most importantly, what is his purpose in this new, war-torn age? In this video, we will uncover the truth behind Guilliman's survival, his struggles in a galaxy that barely resembles the one he once knew, and the role he now plays in shaping the future of humanity. If you want to understand why Roboute Guilliman is still alive, you first need to understand what a Primarch actually is. These aren't just enhanced humans or even standard Astartes turned up to 11. No, Primarchs are something far beyond that. Transhuman demigods, each crafted by the Emperor himself to be the ultimate leaders, warriors, and strategists of mankind. They were meant to be perfect, each embodying a different facet of war, governance, or leadership. And among them, Guilliman was unique. Unlike some of his more extreme brothers, like the brutal Angron, the mysterious Alpharius, or the terrifyingly psychic Magnus, Guilliman was a balance of warrior and statesman. He wasn't just built for war, he was built for empire building. Where others thrived in chaos and destruction, Guilliman thrived in order and structure. He could wage war, yes, but he could also rebuild civilizations, design complex administrative systems, and create something greater than just a trail of conquered worlds. This is what made him different, and it's a key reason why he survived when so many others fell. Physically, Guilliman, like all Primarchs, was a genetic masterpiece. He was faster, stronger, and more resilient than even the most elite space marine. His body was designed to endure wounds that would be fatal to lesser beings, and his healing abilities were vastly superior to anything found in normal humans. Some theories suggest that his physiology alone might have been slowly counteracting Fulgrim's poison, even if only at a glacial pace. There were reports, whispers really, from pilgrims who visited his stasis shrine on Macragge, claiming they saw his wounds subtly changing, as if his body was trying to repair itself despite being frozen in time. Was it just wishful thinking, or was there some deeper biological process at work? But it wasn't just his body that made Guilliman so difficult to kill. It was his mind. His strategic brilliance wasn't just about battlefield tactics, it was about long-term survival. Unlike many of his brothers who charged headlong into danger with reckless abandon, Guilliman was calculated. He understood logistics, supply chains, and the importance of infrastructure in sustaining an empire. He saw the bigger picture, and this mindset extended to his own existence. Even in death, he had a plan. And here's where things get interesting. Guilliman had foreseen the possibility of his own downfall long before it happened. His partnership with Belisarius Cawl, the brilliant but eccentric tech priest of Mars, wasn't just about military innovation. It was about contingency planning. Some fan theories suggest that Guilliman might have left behind detailed instructions, not just for governing Ultramar in his absence, but for ensuring his own return should he ever fall. Cawl, after all, spent 10,000 years developing the technology that would eventually revive him. Coincidence? Doubtful. Of course, Guilliman's resurrection wasn't just about science. There was another force at play, something older, stranger, and deeply unsettling to many in the Imperium. The Eldari, specifically the Ynnari, had a hand in his revival, and that raises some uncomfortable questions. Was it purely their power that restored him, or was there something about Guilliman himself that allowed the process to succeed? Could it be that his genetic perfection made him more resistant to death than even the Emperor had planned? Some whisper that the Primarchs weren't just created as warriors, they were designed as something more, something bordering on divine. So, was Guilliman's survival just luck? Was it pure biology? Was it part of some grand design he himself had predicted? Or was it something else entirely, something outside even his own understanding? The more you dig into it, the more it seems like his continued existence wasn't just an accident. It was inevitable. The duel between Roboute Guilliman and Fulgrim wasn't just another Primarch battle. It was a tragedy written in blood. It was the moment when order clashed with excess, discipline met corruption, and a brother who still clung to the ideals of humanity faced one who had abandoned them entirely. Guilliman wasn't just fighting a fallen Primarch that day, he was fighting the very essence of chaos itself. And he lost. The battle took place on Thessalia, a world that should have been another victory for the Ultramarines, another step in securing the Imperium against the horrors of the Long War. But fate had other plans. Fulgrim, once a noble warrior and an artist of war, had fully embraced his monstrous transformation. No longer the proud, elegant Primarch of the Emperor's children, he was now something else. A Daemon Prince of Slaanesh, his once perfect form twisted into a nightmarish parody of beauty. He radiated an aura of unnatural grace, a being that was both mesmerizing and horrifying. Guilliman fought as he always did, with precision, with strategy, with the weight of an entire empire behind his every strike. But Fulgrim wasn't just a Primarch anymore. He moved with an unnatural speed, his every motion infused with dark power. And then came the moment that sealed Guilliman's fate. The blade. Fulgrim wielded a sword unlike any other, a weapon that pulsed with raw, malevolent energy. It wasn't just a tool of war, it was a curse-given form, a blade infused with the will of Slaanesh itself. Some say it was reminiscent of the anatheme, the very weapon that had wounded Horus and set the galaxy on fire. Whatever the truth, when Fulgrim's blade found Guilliman's throat, it did more than just cut, it poisoned. Not just in the biological sense, but in something deeper, something almost spiritual. The wound should have killed him outright. A gash across the throat, deep enough to sever arteries and windpipe, laced with the kind of corruption that could rot a god from the inside out. Yet somehow, Guilliman didn't die instantly. He collapsed, choking on his own blood, his enhanced physiology fighting against the inevitable. His warriors rushed to his side, desperate to save him, but they knew there was no hope. Even a Primarch couldn't survive this. And so, in an act of desperation, Guilliman's body was taken back to Macragge, to the very heart of Ultramar, and placed within the stasis field of the Temple of Correction. The decision was both practical and symbolic. Practical? Because stasis would halt the spread of the poison and preserve his body, keeping him in a state where, perhaps one day, something could be done. Symbolic, because Guilliman wasn't just a Primarch, he was a legend. Even in death, his presence mattered. The Imperium needed to believe in him. For 10,000 years he remained frozen in time, his body locked in the moment of his dying breath. The stasis field was absolute, no decay, no change, no hope of recovery. And yet, whispers persisted. Pilgrims flocked to his shrine, gazing upon his lifeless form, and some swore they saw movement. Tiny, almost imperceptible shifts. Was it just the flickering of light? Was it the mind playing tricks? Or was something else happening beneath that frozen moment? This is where the theories begin. Some believe that Guilliman's own biology was fighting back, that even trapped in stasis, his Primarch physiology was slowly, agonizingly healing itself. Others suggest that the Emperor, somehow, in some way, was intervening, subtly keeping his son from slipping away completely. A few even whisper that it was neither science nor faith, but something else entirely. That the touch of chaos itself, the wound given by Fulgrim's blade, had twisted Guilliman in a way that defied logic. Not turning him to the dark gods, but binding him to something beyond mortality. Whatever the truth, Guilliman remained untouched by time, a figure of eternal potential. Not truly dead, not truly alive. Waiting. And then, after 10,000 years, the Imperium would need him once more. The stasis field that held Roboute Guilliman was supposed to be absolute. Time stood still within its shimmering barrier, preserving him at the exact moment of his mortal wounding, neither letting him heal nor allowing him to decay. And yet, for 10,000 years, whispers spread across the Imperium. Whispers that his wounds were changing, that they were healing, that their edges were not as raw, that the pallor of his skin was shifting, that perhaps, just perhaps, he was still fighting, even in frozen time. These stories weren't coming from the Adeptus Mechanicus, nor from the Ultramarines themselves, who maintained an official stance of solemn respect, treating Guilliman's body as an unchanging relic. Instead, it was the pilgrims, the countless billions who flocked to Macragge, who first started to believe that their Primarch was not gone forever. Pilgrimage in the Imperium is not a casual act. It is not a simple journey taken out of curiosity or leisure. It is an ordeal, a test of faith in a galaxy that has long since abandoned hope. Millions made the treacherous journey to the Temple of Correction, some traveling for decades, others giving everything they had just to kneel before the great marble throne where their lord sat motionless. And when they arrived, after enduring war zones, xenos-infested sectors, and warp storms that swallowed whole fleets, they needed to believe that it was all worth it. Faith does strange things to perception. Those who gazed upon Guilliman's preserved form were overwhelmed by its presence. The sheer majesty of the Primarch, still seated in his armor, as though he might stand at any moment. Some claimed they saw his fingers twitch. Others swore that his skin looked less ashen than it had a century before. Some even reported that they heard the faintest whisper in their minds, a voice urging them to remain strong, to endure. Most of these stories were dismissed as the ramblings of desperate minds, the hallucinations of the faithful. The Imperium is built on belief, and in a world where miracles and nightmares coexist, it was easy to discount such things as mere wishful thinking. But then, the stories started becoming more frequent. Too many people were saying the same thing, their accounts eerily similar despite coming from vastly different backgrounds. There were whispers in the ecclesiarchy that Guilliman's body was showing signs of change. Even some within the Ultramarines began to quietly question what was happening. A few senior tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, those with access to long-term records of Guilliman's condition, noticed subtle but undeniable differences in ancient Pict recordings. No official statement was ever made, and many believe any such findings were immediately classified. So, what was happening? Some argue that Guilliman's unique Primarch biology was working against the stasis field itself, slowly but inevitably pushing against the moment of his near death. Others claim that the Emperor's will was at work, subtly reversing the wound that should have killed him, a sign that his plan for Guilliman was not yet finished. And then, there are darker theories. Whispers that something unnatural had entered Guilliman when Fulgrim's blade struck him. That the wound was never meant to be fatal, but transformative, a slow-burning poison that was altering him in ways no one could understand. Regardless of the cause, the myth of Guilliman's eventual return spread across the Imperium like wildfire. The mere idea of a Primarch rising again was intoxicating. The Imperium of the 41st millennium was crumbling, bleeding out under the weight of endless wars, xenos incursions, and the ever-growing power of chaos. People needed a hero. They needed something to believe in, beyond the distant, silent Emperor, trapped in his own eternal stasis on the Golden Throne. Guilliman became more than just a lost Primarch. He became a symbol of hope. Countless shrines were built in his name. Cults formed around the belief that he would return when the Imperium needed him most, taking their prophecies from the fact that he had already been the savior of humanity once before. Some believed he would rise and lead a new great crusade, one that would finally reclaim the galaxy and usher in an age of light. Others whispered of darker possibilities, that he would return not as the Emperor's champion, but as something else entirely. Faith is a powerful thing in the Imperium. It can drive entire populations to madness, fuel wars, and even alter reality itself in ways that defy logic. For 10,000 years, millions upon millions of desperate souls prayed at the feet of their motionless lord, hoping, believing, willing him to return. And then, impossibly, he did. Belisarius Cawl is one of the most enigmatic figures in the entire Imperium, a being so ancient and so deeply intertwined with the mysteries of the Adeptus Mechanicus that his very existence raises uncomfortable questions. He is not just a tech priest, he is a living relic of the Great Crusade. A mind that has endured for over 10,000 years, constantly learning, expanding, and, most shockingly, questioning. That last part is what makes him so dangerous, and why many within the Mechanicus regard him with deep suspicion. Call's involvement with Guilliman's resurrection is a story that stretches back to the days immediately following the Horus Heresy. Somehow, during the chaos of that era, Guilliman foresaw a need for a future contingency plan, one that involved his own potential death and, if needed, his return. This alone is fascinating. Did he have some hidden foresight? Did he always suspect that the Imperium would one day fall into such ruin that he would be needed again? Or was it simply the pragmatism that defined him, a willingness to plan for even the most extreme possibilities? Whatever the case, Guilliman entrusted Call with two monumental tasks. The first was to find a way to bring him back from the brink of death should the need ever arise. The second was even more ambitious, to create a new breed of Astartes, superior to those of the past, immune to the genetic flaws that had plagued some of the original legions. It's worth noting how insane this request was. Even in the golden age of the Emperor, such a task would have been monumental. But Call took it on without hesitation. And then he spent the next 10 millennia working in secret, deep within the forge worlds of the Adeptus Mechanicus, refining his knowledge, gathering forbidden data, and crafting technologies that should not have been possible. There is a certain irony in all of this. The Imperium of the 41st millennium is stagnant, bound by superstition and dogma. Innovation is heresy, and even the Adeptus Mechanicus, for all their technological mastery, treat knowledge as something to be hoarded rather than expanded. And yet here was Call, doing the unthinkable, advancing science. He is one of the few beings in the galaxy who has dared to break the chains of technological stagnation, and for that, he is both revered and feared. The technology that ultimately revived Guilliman is something that defies easy categorization. The Armor of Fate, a masterpiece of technology, was more than just power armor. It was a life support system, an intricate fusion of Mechanicus engineering and bioalchemical processes designed to sustain Guilliman's body even in the most critical of states. But the armor alone wasn't enough. The true key to Guilliman's resurrection was a combination of science, ancient relics, and something even more controversial, the intervention of the Eldari. This is where things become truly fascinating. It wasn't just Call's technology that brought Guilliman back, but the power of Yvraine, the emissary of Yniad, the Eldari god of the dead. She played a crucial role in reigniting the spark of life within the Primarch, channeling the energies of her nascent god to push him back into the realm of the living. The implications of this are staggering. Did Guilliman's resurrection succeed because of technology, or was it something more? Did the combination of Call's science and Eldari mysticism create something new, something neither race could have achieved alone? This also raises the question, was Guilliman truly dead? If he was, then his revival is nothing short of miraculous, a feat that defies the very nature of existence. But if he was simply in a state of extreme stasis, then perhaps Call's work was less about resurrection and more about reawakening. Some theorists believe that the Emperor himself may have played a role, subtly influencing events from the Golden Throne, guiding the right people into the right places at the right time. Others wonder if the process that brought Guilliman back might one day be applied to the Emperor himself. If technology and Eldari power could restore a Primarch, could it do the same for the Master of Mankind? Of course, there are those who distrust Call and his work entirely. Many within the Imperium see him as an abomination, a heretic hiding within the Mechanicus, a being that has meddled too deeply in things best left alone. His methods are deeply unorthodox, even by the standards of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and his willingness to use xenos artifacts and knowledge is a stain upon his reputation. The Primaris Space Marines, his other great project, are already viewed with skepticism by many traditionalists within the Imperium. If his resurrection of Guilliman had failed, or worse, if Guilliman had returned, changed, then Call would likely have been executed as a traitor. But for all the controversy surrounding him, one thing is undeniable. Call succeeded. He achieved what no one else could, defying the limits of the Imperium's technological stagnation and bringing back a legend from the past. His work has reshaped the course of the Imperium forever, for better or worse. The question now is, what else does he know? What other secrets does he still hold? And if he was capable of bringing back Guilliman, what else might he be capable of? The idea that an Eldar god, of all things, played a role in resurrecting Roboute Guilliman is something that still makes a lot of die-hard Imperial loyalists deeply uncomfortable. And honestly, can you blame them? The Imperium has spent 10,000 years indoctrinating its people to believe that xenos are the ultimate enemy, that they are corrupt, treacherous, and fundamentally opposed to humanity's divine destiny. And yet, when the moment came when the Imperium needed a miracle, it wasn't faith in the Emperor that saved Guilliman. It wasn't even Imperial science or the Adeptus Mechanicus, despite all their arcane technological knowledge. It was the Eldar. Or more specifically, the enigmatic figure of Yvraine and the death god Ennead. It's almost poetic in a way. The Eldar, the race that once ruled the galaxy, that fell into ruin because of their own hubris, ended up being the key to reviving humanity's greatest living leader. And the best part? They didn't even do it out of some noble sense of duty or a desire for peace. No, the Eldar never act without an agenda. Yvraine and the Inari didn't resurrect Guilliman because they loved the Imperium or because they saw humanity as their allies. They did it because they needed him. The Eldar have a legend, one of their many half-forgotten myths, about Ennead, the god of the dead, who would rise and destroy Slaanesh, the cosmic horror that has feasted on their souls for millennia. But Ennead, at least in this age, is incomplete, a being that exists in an almost embryonic state, waiting for the right moment to fully awaken. Yvraine, as his prophet, has dedicated herself to accelerating that process, and for reasons only she and the most powerful Eldar seers understand, resurrecting Guilliman was a necessary step in that grand plan. That alone is enough to make any Imperial purist's skin crawl. Was Guilliman's resurrection purely a means to an end for the Eldar? Was it some cosmic chess move in a game only they understood? There's an argument to be made that Yvraine and her followers weren't really interested in saving the Imperium at all. Instead, they might have seen Guilliman as a stabilizing force, someone who could keep the galaxy from completely collapsing into chaos long enough for the Eldar to execute whatever their next move is. If the Imperium fell too soon, perhaps it would have thrown the balance of power in the galaxy in a way that would have doomed their own people even further. And yet, despite all the distrust, the Imperium accepted their help. Why? Because they had no choice. When the forces of chaos were closing in, when the Black Legion was breaking through Ultramar's defenses, when all hope seemed lost, Khal and the Ultramarines could not afford to be picky about who offered them salvation. It must have been a brutal decision for men like Marnus Calgar, warriors who had spent their entire lives fighting and slaughtering Eldar, to stand aside and let them interfere in something as sacred as the fate of a Primarch. But what alternative was there? Let Guilliman remain in stasis forever? Let the Imperium crumble while they clung to their xenophobic dogma? This, in itself, is fascinating because it suggests that, deep down, the Imperium can change. For all its rigid traditions and blind faith, it proved that when the situation was dire enough, when survival was truly on the line, it could make compromises. This was not the first time humanity had worked with the Eldar. There are scattered historical accounts of brief alliances, usually against chaos. But it was one of the most significant. It was proof that, if only for a moment, necessity could override even the most deeply ingrained prejudices. But that doesn't mean everyone was happy about it. There are plenty of Imperial fanatics who still refuse to accept that Guilliman's resurrection was anything other than an act of the Emperor's will. To them, the involvement of the Eldar is either a lie, or worse, proof that Guilliman himself has been tainted by Xenos' influence. Some conspiracy theories suggest that he came back wrong, that the Eldar twisted him in some unseen way, planting ideas or even subconscious commands in his mind. After all, isn't it strange that one of the first things he did upon returning was begin reorganizing the Imperium? That he started pushing reforms, breaking away from some of the old traditions, and even questioning the ecclesiarchy? These changes terrify the more dogmatic elements of the Imperium, and some whisper that it's because Guilliman is no longer fully of the Emperor's vision, that his rebirth was not entirely human. Of course, this theory is pure paranoia. Guilliman's reforms, his desire to restore some measure of efficiency to the Imperium, are entirely in line with who he was before he fell. If anything, his resurrection has only made him more aware of how far the Imperium has strayed from what the Emperor originally intended. If that disturbs the High Lords of Terra, well, perhaps it should. Still, there's no denying that this event has left a scar on the Imperium's psyche. The idea that the fate of one of its greatest heroes was, even partially, in the hands of a xenos god is something that will never sit well with the fanatical masses. And perhaps that's the most ironic part of all. Guilliman, the ultimate strategist, the master planner, was forced to accept the help of his oldest enemies to ensure the survival of the Imperium. In doing so, he may have opened a door that can never be fully closed. The question now is, will the Imperium learn from this? Or will it do what it always does? Deny, suppress, and pretend that the uncomfortable truth never happened. Imagine waking up from a coma and realizing that everything you fought for, everything you built, has turned into a grotesque parody of your original vision. That's exactly what happened to Roboute Guilliman. One moment, he was a Primarch of the Imperium, leading humanity with reason and discipline. And the next, he opens his eyes 10,000 years later to find himself in a galaxy that has completely lost its way. The Imperium he left behind was supposed to be an empire of progress, order, and unity. What he found instead was a bloated, corrupt theocracy, ruled by fanatics and bureaucrats who worship his father as an actual god. If that doesn't qualify as a waking nightmare, I don't know what does. Guilliman had always been the most pragmatic of the Primarchs, the one who believed in logic, structure, and governance. While his brothers waged wars with reckless abandon, he built civilizations. He wrote the Codex Astartes, ensuring that the Space Marines would never again fall to hubris as they did during the Horus Heresy. He didn't just fight for humanity, he planned for its future. And then, thanks to Fulgrim's poisoned blade, he was robbed of the chance to guide that future. When he finally returned, he found that the Imperium hadn't just stagnated, it had rotted from the inside out. Imagine his horror when he learned that the Emperor, the greatest human mind to ever exist, was being worshipped as a god. Guilliman knew his father personally. He had spoken with him, learned from him, and more than that, understood him. The Emperor despised religion. He saw it as a crutch, a weakness that had led humanity into the age of strife. And yet, the Imperium was now entirely built around his worship. The ecclesiarchy ruled with an iron grip, the imperial cult dictated every aspect of life, and blind faith had replaced reason. Guilliman was no fool. He understood the power of belief, the need for unity in a galaxy teetering on the brink of annihilation. But this was madness. And it wasn't just the religion. The Imperium's bureaucracy had metastasized into a monstrous, self-serving machine. Instead of a government that functioned efficiently, he found a vast, decaying system where entire planetary populations could starve simply because some administratum clerk filed the wrong paperwork, if they even bothered filing it at all. It was a system that crushed innovation, punished intelligence, and rewarded dogmatic obedience. To Guilliman, who had once overseen Ultramar as a shining beacon of civilization, this must have felt like an insult to everything he ever stood for. So how did he react? Well, at first, there was frustration. Real, deep, soul-crushing frustration. How could humanity have let this happen? How could they take his father's vision and twist it into something so utterly backwards? But then, ever the strategist, Guilliman did what he always did. He adapted. He didn't openly condemn the ecclesiarchy, even though it must have taken every ounce of self-control not to do so. He knew that trying to dismantle the imperial cult would only cause more chaos, that faith had become too deeply ingrained in the Imperium's identity to be simply erased. Instead, he worked from within, subtly trying to shift the Imperium back towards something functional. He reformed the Adeptus Terra, streamlined the bureaucracy where he could, and cut through the worst inefficiencies. It wasn't a complete overhaul. There was too much inertia, too much resistance, but it was a start. What's truly fascinating, though, is that Guilliman himself began questioning things. He wasn't just disgusted with the Imperium. He was uncertain about his own place in it. Was the Emperor truly divine? Guilliman had never believed in gods, but after his resurrection, after everything he had seen, the warp, chaos, his own return from the brink, he found himself doubting his old convictions. The fact that he even entertained the possibility of the Emperor's divinity is one of the most human things about him. Unlike the fanatics who blindly accept, or the cynics who reject outright, Guilliman was trying to understand. And then there's the most tragic part of all. He doesn't belong in this new Imperium. He's a relic of another age, a man from a time when humanity still had hope. Now, he walks among people who see him as a god in his own right, who kneel before him and whisper prayers, when all he wants is for them to think for themselves. He's not just a ruler, he's a stranger in his own empire, a man out of time. That's the real burden he carries. He's not just fighting chaos or xenos or even the High Lords of Terra. He's fighting against the weight of 10,000 years of decay, and he's painfully aware that he might never be able to truly fix it. Some fans argue that Guilliman is playing a long game, that he's subtly maneuvering the Imperium toward a future where it can finally break free from its own chains. Others think he's doomed to fail, that the Imperium is too far gone, too entrenched in its own madness to ever change. There's even a theory that he might one day abandon the Imperium altogether, realizing that it's beyond saving. Imagine that, Guilliman turning his back on the empire he once built, seeking some new way forward. It sounds unthinkable, but in a galaxy as dark and twisted as this one, nothing is impossible. For now, though, he fights. Not just against the enemies of mankind, but against the slow, creeping entropy that threatens to drag humanity into oblivion. Whether he can truly change the Imperium, or whether it will break him in the process, that's the real question. If you really stop to think about it, Roboute Guilliman shouldn't be alive. Not after taking a mortal wound from Fulgrim's cursed blade, not after spending 10,000 years in a stasis field, not after waking up to a galaxy that should have crushed him under the weight of its own decay. And yet, here he is, walking, breathing, fighting, leading. But how? That's where the armor of fate comes in. Or, as some fans like to call it, his personal life support prison. The armor of fate isn't just some fancy relic of the Adeptus Mechanicus. It's a miracle of technology, a suit of artificer armor so advanced that it might as well be magic. Crafted by none other than Belisarius Cawl, it's designed not only to protect Guilliman in battle, but to keep him alive in ways that should be impossible. This thing is essentially a fusion of arcane Mechanicus biosorcery, lost technology, and possibly even the Emperor's own touch. It continuously heals his body, compensating for the lingering effects of Fulgrim's poison, repairing damage in real time, and, most disturbingly, ensuring that he can never truly die. But here's where things get weird. Guilliman isn't just a Primarch in a fancy new suit. Some fans believe that he's no longer fully human, not even by Primarch standards. There's something off about him. He moves with a precision that's almost unnatural. His wounds seal faster than they should, and sometimes there's a strange glow in his eyes that wasn't there before. Some theories suggest that the armor is doing more than just keeping him alive. It's changing him. One of the most unsettling ideas floating around is that Guilliman might not even be in full control of himself anymore. The armor, after all, was made by Cawl, and Cawl is not exactly known for explaining what he's doing. For all we know, there are buried subroutines in the armor that Guilliman hasn't even discovered yet. Could the Mechanicus have hardwired some kind of override into his very flesh? Could the Emperor himself be influencing Guilliman through the suit, using him as a puppet to steer the Imperium in the right direction? There's no proof of this, of course, but in a universe where gods and daemons meddle with reality on a daily basis, nothing is impossible. And then there's the more esoteric side of the argument. Some fans believe that Guilliman, whether he admits it or not, has already transcended into something more than just a Primarch. He survived death. He walked away from wounds that should have killed even someone of his power. He fights with a level of endurance that makes even other Astartes look fragile. Is he becoming something beyond human? Something closer to a demigod? There's precedent for this. Sanguinius, Vulcan, and even Lorgar were all said to be touched by something greater. Could Guilliman be on the path to ascension, whether he likes it or not? If that's the case, it raises a terrifying question. What is he becoming? Unlike the Chaos Primarchs, who embraced their twisted transformations, Guilliman never sought power for its own sake. He fears what might be happening to him, even if he doesn't say it outright. Imagine being in his position. Waking up every day knowing that you're not the same as you were before. Feeling something stir in your blood that wasn't there before. Wondering if you're even fully yourself anymore. Some even speculate that Guilliman might be unknowingly tied to the Emperor in a deeper way than before. The Emperor's sword, which Guilliman now wields, is not just a weapon. It burns with a holy fire, capable of obliterating demons and warping reality itself. This isn't normal technology, it's divine in nature. And yet, Guilliman, the rationalist, the one who always dismissed superstition, can wield it without hesitation. Could it be that the Emperor's will is flowing through him? Could Guilliman be, in some way, an extension of his father's presence in the material world? If so, what does that mean for his own identity? At the heart of all of this is a paradox. Guilliman is alive, but is he truly himself? He's still leading the Imperium, still strategizing, still fighting, but is he doing it as the same man who ruled Ultramar 10,000 years ago? Or has he become something else, something even he doesn't fully understand? Some fans believe that this is just the beginning of a much larger transformation, that one day, Guilliman might evolve into something akin to a new kind of being, a bridge between man and God, between logic and faith. Others argue that he's already lost something crucial, that the real Guilliman died on Thessaly, and what we have now is just a shell, a being running on borrowed time and borrowed purpose. For now, all we know is this: Guilliman should be dead, but he isn't. And whatever he is now, whatever he's becoming, it might be something the galaxy isn't ready for. If Guilliman hadn't returned when he did, the Imperium as we know it would have been nothing more than a crumbling ruin, swallowed by the Great Rift, ripped apart by war and drowned in its own incompetence. The galaxy was this close to complete collapse. Chaos was stronger than ever. Alien threats pressed in from every side, and the so-called leaders of the Imperium were too busy squabbling over petty power plays to realize that they were all about to die. It wasn't just bad, it was apocalyptic. And then, against all odds, Guilliman walked out of the past and took control. His return wasn't just a miracle, it was a lifeline. A cold, logical, battle-hardened lifeline. If the Imperium had been a sinking ship, Guilliman wasn't just the guy who patched the hull. He rebuilt the damn vessel while it was still being fired upon. He seized power in the only way that mattered, by forcing the bloated, rotting bureaucracy of the Imperium to listen to someone who actually knew what they were doing. Let's talk about the High Lords of Terra. These guys are supposed to be the rulers of the Imperium, but by the time Guilliman arrived, they were little more than power-hungry aristocrats, corrupt priests, and paranoid administrators, all too wrapped up in their own political games to care about the bigger picture. Guilliman walked into the Senatorum Imperialis and, in classic fashion, made it very clear that he was not interested in their nonsense. His exact words to them were, "This is no longer your Imperium, it is mine." That single moment changed everything. The High Lords could have fought him, of course. They could have tried to resist, clinging to their useless authority. But what could they do? Guilliman was a Primarch, a demigod of war and governance, the literal son of the Emperor, and most importantly, the only one who had an actual plan. He assumed the title of Lord Commander of the Imperium, making himself the highest military authority in the galaxy. Not just a general, an absolute ruler. Of course, not everyone was happy about that. The Inquisition in particular hated the idea of Guilliman waltzing in and changing the rules. After all, they had spent 10,000 years enforcing their vision of the Imperium, one built on secrecy, suspicion, and the ruthless extermination of anyone who didn't fit their definition of loyal. Guilliman, on the other hand, saw them for what they really were, a necessary evil that had gotten way out of control. Some inquisitors wanted to kill him outright. He was, after all, dangerously progressive by their standards. He questioned the state of the Imperium, spoke out against the religious dogma surrounding the Emperor, and worst of all, he worked with xenos, albeit reluctantly. To the more fanatical members of the Inquisition, that was outright heresy. But Guilliman didn't back down. Instead, he reminded them that while they had been playing their shadow games, the Imperium had almost died. He forced them to adapt, to accept that their old ways weren't enough anymore. His greatest achievement, though, wasn't just political, it was military. The Indomitus Crusade was his response to the Imperium's collapse, and it was the largest, most ambitious military campaign since the Great Crusade itself. The moment he took power, he didn't waste time on speeches or ceremonies. He mobilized everything. Every remaining Space Marine chapter, every Imperial Guard regiment, every ship, every weapon, every soldier who could still fight was thrown into the war to reclaim lost Imperial territory. And at the heart of it all was Guilliman, leading the charge, fighting alongside his warriors, proving through sheer action that the Imperium wasn't dead yet. But here's the thing. Guilliman isn't just a warrior. He's not like the other Primarchs who relied purely on strength and fury. He is a strategist, a builder, a ruler. He doesn't just win battles. He reshapes the entire structure of the Imperium to make sure it survives long after he's gone. He didn't just send out armies, he rebuilt the war machine itself. He restructured how the Imperium fights, how it recruits, how it maintains supply lines, how it governs its worlds. One of his most controversial decisions was the creation of the Primaris Space Marines. This was a massive shakeup for the Astartes, and not everyone was on board with it. Imagine being a veteran Space Marine, having served for hundreds of years, only to suddenly be told that there's a new and improved version of you. Many chapters saw the Primaris as outsiders, artificial warriors who weren't truly their brothers. Guilliman, of course, didn't care about their egos, he cared about results. The Imperium needed stronger, more adaptable warriors, and the Primaris were the answer. And then there's the biggest question. Why is Guilliman still alive, strategically speaking? What stops someone from assassinating him? What keeps him from being overthrown? Simple. He is too valuable to lose. Even the factions that despise him, the Ecclesiarchy, the Inquisition, the more fanatical Space Marine chapters, need him. They may hate his reforms, his progressive thinking, his willingness to challenge old traditions, but they know that without him, the Imperium will fall. Think about it. The Emperor is nothing more than a withered husk on the Golden Throne. The other loyalist Primarchs are either missing, dead, or insane. The Imperium is surrounded by enemies that want it to burn. Guilliman is the only force keeping it together, and that, ironically, is what protects him. Even his enemies within the Imperium can't afford to get rid of him, because they know the second he's gone, everything falls apart. Some fans speculate that Guilliman knows this and is using it as leverage. He may not like the Imperium in its current state, but he understands that the only way to fix it is to stay in power, no matter how much opposition he faces. Others believe that he's playing an even longer game, slowly steering the Imperium toward a future where it no longer relies on blind faith and outdated traditions. One of the most compelling theories is that Guilliman is waiting for his lost brothers. If another loyalist Primarch were to return, say Lion L. Johnson or Vulcan, it could shift the balance of power dramatically. Would Guilliman remain the supreme leader, or would he step aside for a different vision of the Imperium? Some believe that he's actually preparing for their return, setting the stage for a time when he won't have to rule alone. In the end, Guilliman is still alive, not just physically, but as a strategic necessity. He is the Imperium's greatest asset and its greatest burden. He is the last Primarch, the last hope of a dying empire, the only one who can still see a future where humanity doesn't just survive, but thrives. And that's why, for all the opposition he faces, for all the enemies he has within and without, no one can afford to let him die. Because if he falls, so does everything else. Roboute Guilliman has returned from the dead, walks among mortals once more, and wields authority like no one else in the Imperium. But the big question remains, is he immortal now? Will he one day succumb to time, wounds, or the slow decay of his own body? Or has he become something far greater, something that might even rival the Emperor himself? Let's be real, Guilliman shouldn't even be alive. He was mortally wounded by Fulgrim, placed in stasis for 10,000 years, and then somehow brought back through a bizarre mix of technology and eldritch xenos magic. His very existence is a defiance of natural law, and the armor he wears, the armor of fate, is not just a suit of war gear, it's a life support system, an arcane construct of mechanicus brilliance that keeps him alive, even when he should be dead. So does that mean he's immortal? Not in the traditional sense. He can be killed, there's no doubt about that. If he were to suffer catastrophic injuries beyond what his armor can handle, or so if something managed to destroy the technology keeping him functional, he could absolutely die. But the bigger question is, will he age? Guilliman himself doesn't know. Unlike regular space marines, Primarchs can feel the passage of time. They don't age like normal humans, but they do mature, change, and eventually reach a point where their bodies might start failing. 10,000 years in stasis means he has technically skipped past any natural aging he might have endured. But does that mean he's frozen in time forever? If he had remained in stasis, his body would have never changed. But now that he's back, will he eventually deteriorate? That's one of the great unknowns. Some fans believe that Guilliman's return is just the beginning of his transformation into something more than a Primarch. The way he was resurrected, through the combined efforts of Call's technology and Eldari mysticism, means he is no longer purely a product of the Emperor's design. He is something else now, something neither fully human nor fully divine. Some even argue that he might be on the path to godhood. Which brings us to the other big question. Is Guilliman going to become the new Emperor? This is something that divides the fanbase. On one hand, Guilliman is the closest thing the Imperium has to a functioning leader. He holds the title of Lord Commander of the Imperium, effectively making him the highest authority in the galaxy aside from the Emperor himself. He's rebuilding, reforming, and leading the Imperium in a way that hasn't been done since the Great Crusade. But would he actually sit on the Golden Throne? That's a whole different story. Guilliman has made it very clear that he hates the deification of the Emperor. He sees the ecclesiarchy's religious fanaticism as one of the greatest failings of the Imperium, a corruption of everything his father stood for. If Guilliman were to take the throne, it wouldn't be as a god, it would be as a ruler. The problem? The Imperium isn't built for that anymore. It's a theocracy, a realm ruled by faith and fear, where the Emperor isn't just a man, but a divine being. And Guilliman, despite being his literal son, does not fit into that myth. That doesn't mean it won't happen, though. Some theories suggest that Guilliman might be forced onto the Golden Throne, not because he wants to, but because the Imperium needs him to. The throne itself is failing, and many believe that when it finally breaks, it could mean the Emperor's death. If that happens, Guilliman might be the only one capable of stepping in, either to take his father's place or to guide humanity through the chaos that follows. But here's where it gets really interesting. What if the Emperor doesn't want Guilliman to take the throne? When Guilliman met with his father after returning to Terra, he didn't find the wise, all-seeing Emperor of old. He found something cold, alien, and incomprehensible. Guilliman himself admitted that he felt more like a tool than a son, as if the Emperor had long since stopped seeing him as a person. Could it be that the Emperor knows Guilliman's fate? That he has already seen a future where Guilliman tries to take his place and fails? And then there's the wild card, the other Primarchs. Guilliman isn't the only one out there. The Lion has returned, Vulcan is still out there somewhere, and who knows what will happen if other lost Primarchs come back into play. If more loyalist Primarchs return, Guilliman's role might shift dramatically. Will he remain in charge, or will he be challenged? Could there even be a civil war among the loyalists over the future of the Imperium? The truth is, we don't know. Guilliman's fate is still unwritten, and his survival raises more questions than it answers. He is a warrior, a ruler, a strategist, and perhaps something even greater than all of those combined. Whether he becomes the savior of the Imperium or its ultimate tragedy remains to be seen. Do these theories seem reasonable? Perhaps you have an alternative or even better idea. Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel with notifications turned on so you don't miss my latest uploads.